Call to order. Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers meeting April 25, 2019. All managers are present except Manager Maxwell. We're very happy to welcome Manager Hitchmoney this evening. And the first item of business is swearing in. Mr. Smith.
Manager Hitchmoney, if you would stand and raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Arun Hitchmoney,
I, Arun Hitchmoney,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the constitutions
that I will support the constitutions
of the United States and the state of Minnesota,
of the United States and the state of Minnesota,
and faithfully discharge the duties
and faithfully discharge the duties
of the office of manager
of the office of manager
of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District
of Minnehaha Creek Watershed District
to the best of my judgment and ability.
to the best of my judgment and ability.
Very good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Is there any member of the public who wishes to address the board on a matter that's not on the agenda or that's on the consent agenda? See no hands, we move to item 4, approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Manager Miller moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Olson. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Under the consent agenda this evening, we have approval of the April 11, 2019 board minutes, approval of the general checking account, approval of the surety checking account, which has no items as I recall, and adoption of resolution 19-048, authorization to submit the Bowser annual report. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rodness, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I was, for President's report here, I was not able to attend the interviews for the strategic communications proposals, but I was very happy that Manager Miller was able to be there to represent the board. So thank you, Manager Miller.
What meeting?
The interviews.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. And Manager Miller, can you give us a policy and planning committee report?
The Policy and Planning Committee discussed the proposed capital improvement program and some decided on the staff is going to come back with some language that shows some flexibility in the plan to move projects from year to year if we're not making the progress that we need to put them in for a particular year with a particular amount of funding. So, and that plan will have to go out by June. Correct. So we got plenty of time to work on clarifying the actual program for, is it 5 years? Yeah. 5 years, okay.
Thank you. The upcoming meeting and event schedule includes the May 1st Citizens Advisory Committee meeting, which will be attended by Manager Rodness, and subsequent committee and board meetings through the month of May. We'll move to item 11.1, which is permit 19064, presentation by Heidi Quinn.
Thank you, President White, managers. This evening, I am presenting permit 19064 for the 28th Avenue Bridge replacement and associated trail improvements. The permit is before you for consideration as the applicant, being the City of Minneapolis, has requested an exception from full compliance with the wetland protection rule. There we go. So this evening, I will go over a brief project overview, touch on the rule analysis as provided in the permit report, go into detail regarding the exception request, and then conclude with a staff recommendation. So the 28th Avenue Bridge is located about 500 feet downstream of Lake Hiawatha. It does cross over Minnehaha Creek and is located in the city of Minneapolis. This is a picture of the existing bridge in its current condition. The bridge is over 100 years old, and it has been determined that it needs some structural repair. As you can see, it's an arch bridge, and then this is the concrete plume on the north side of the creek that currently just discharges directly into the creek. The city is proposing to, apologize, I'm having some clicking issues, there you go. Replace the bridge with a clear span bridge and incorporate a trail bypass underneath. So this picture shows a cross-section. The dashed lines are the existing structure, and then the bold ones are what is proposed. So the trail underpass is proposed on the north side of the creek, and then also that concrete flume will be replaced with a pipe and outfall. So the project triggers the district's erosion control, floodplain alteration, water body crossings and structures, and wetland protection rules. The project does not propose to increase impervious surface greater than 10,000 square feet, and therefore is exempt from stormwater management requirements per the linear transportation provisions. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to touch just very briefly on the rules analysis as provided in the permit report, and if there are additional questions by the board, I do have some additional slides that we can go through at the end. If there are some more questions, I think high-level things to touch on is that for floodplain alteration, they are creating floodplain storage as they are kind of widening that area that acts as the existing control structure. And then we did work quite a bit with the city to ensure that there will be no rise in floodplain or flood stages upstream or downstream by widening that area. And they have submitted information that has been reviewed by staff and the district engineer to show conformance with the rules, with the exception of section 6C of the wetland protection rule, which outlines the minimum buffer width requirements, and that is what they are seeking an exception for. So kind of stepping back a little bit, earlier in February, Tiffany had briefed the board committee regarding the Minnehaha Parkway Regional Trail Master Plan as it is in its conceptual phases. And I just wanted to point out that staff did flag this permit application as the bridge is located just west of segment 4. And currently there is a, as it's still in conceptual phases, but there is a BMP proposed just east of the bridge, so 28th Avenue is about right here. So we did meet with the city in collaboration with the park board and had them look at, if we could incorporate any of the concepts or elements of the master trail into this existing project. The consulting engineer for the city did provide a plan sheet shown here to demonstrate the feasibility of tying into a future BMP if it were to be implemented. And so that would involve, currently the plan has this pipe coming out down here. And so we looked at rerouting it here and having it discharge downstream a little bit further in the creek, and then bulkheading it and leaving the opportunity for a future tie-in here. After some further kind of conversations and meetings, it was determined that there was an opportunity to provide an immediate water resource benefit by incorporating a stormwater BMP within the right-of-way of 28th Avenue, which would capture some of the stormwater runoff from the road. And so the plan was amended to include a biofiltration swale, which will treat stormwater runoff before it then discharges to the new outfall located here. And so now I'm going to kind of dive into the exception analysis. And as I stated, if there are other questions regarding the other rules, I'd be happy to go through those. So just to remind the board, the exception analysis outlines that managers may grant an exception when there's an alternative method of treatment that's proposed that achieves a greater degree of natural resource protection than strict compliance with the rule. The intent of Section 6C of the Wetland Protection Rule, which outlines the minimum buffer width requirements, is to provide habitat and then also to filter runoff before it goes into the receiving water body. So the city has provided a wetland buffer plan. The wetland is kind of highlighted in green right here. That is existing wetland fringe to the creek. The district's functional assessment of wetlands does identify that as a preserve management class, which requires a 75-foot buffer width. Based on the provisions of the buffer averaging allowances in the rule, that width could be reduced down to 50%, which would be 37.5 feet. And so the red line shows what a full 75-foot buffer would look like. Due to the location of, this is an existing trail here, and then this is the new proposed trail to tie in, they are not able to achieve the minimum buffer width requirement and have been able to provide the greatest extent, which is just under 15.5 feet at its shortest point of wetland buffer. And so this table on the bottom just kind of summarizes what's required versus what's provided. So they have about a 20-foot shortfall in the buffer width provided, and then they also have approximately about a 1,500 square foot shortfall of the buffer square footage provided. And that is what they are seeking an exception for. So since the project is not required to provide stormwater management, to kind of look at it in an exception framework, we had them run a MIDS analysis, which is kind of a simplified model to determine how much phosphorus removal would be taken from the filtration of runoff from the trail area here through a 37.5-foot buffer. Those calculations came out to show 0.02 pounds per year of phosphorus would be removed. So then we had them run the same exercise for the water that's treated by the biofiltration swale. I should note that both of these were looking at filtration of the first 1 inch of runoff. And so we had them run the same exercise through the bioswale, and that came out to show that 0.08 pounds of phosphorus per year would be removed. And so therefore they have demonstrated that by treating the runoff within the right-of-way here before it all falls into the creek is providing a greater water resource benefit than if, you know, they were to take this trail out or were able to achieve that 37.5-foot buffer. And staff also find that since they have provided wetland buffer to the greatest extent, this blue is to not be disturbed. The yellow is proposed to be disturbed and restored, that they're still meeting the intent of the habitat for wildlife as well. And so that pretty much concludes my presentation. Staff find that the applicant has submitted sufficient evidence to for the board to consider the exception request and recommend approval of the permit with the conditions listed in the report. And I'll just kind of go through those again. So authorization from the park board for the city to perform work on their property, submission of a signed plan set from the city of Minneapolis. Currently, we just have one signed from the engineer. Submission of an NPDES permit, and then also submission of a maintenance declaration for water body crossings and wetland buffers. The final condition regarding a plan amendment for a 4-foot sump is recommended as the current sump is not up to 4 feet deep, and that is the kind of a 4-foot depth sump is in conformance with the stormwater manual design standards, and so having adequate pre-treatment is going to allow that BMP to function as it's been demonstrated in the modeling. And I'd be happy to take any questions, and just would like to remind the board that staff is requesting them to consider the exception to section 6C of the Wetland Protection Rule, and then consideration of approval of the permit.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn. Is there a motion to grant the exception to Section 6C of the Wetland Protection Rule?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus, any questions? Mr. Smith?
I'd just highlight, I think, one other way to look at that last condition that Ms. Quinn highlighted of the sump requirement is pretreatment. The water quality treatment analysis she gave is the real basis for the overall exception. You're replacing the filtration capacity of the buffer and finding that it's met and exceeded. And I think another way to consider that condition is that's part of why you would grant an exception, is because of that additional treatment. I just wanted to note that for you.
All right, thank you. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Then is there a motion to approve the permit with all the considerations assigned, including the 4-foot sump, and with the exception that we just voted on? Is there a motion to approve the permit?
Move approval.
Manager Rodmas, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Miller, are there questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 12.1, Ms. Brown. Contract with CARP Solutions.
Thank you, President White and managers. I am here seeking authorization to enter a contract with CARP Solutions for carp removal services through baited box net trapping. I'm going to provide a little bit of a background on the 6 Mile Creek Halsted Bay Restoration Program, a bit of a reminder on sort of our approach with carp removal, a progress update on how we did in 2018 on removing carp, and then we'll go through the contract. So as the board is aware, carp management is a key strategy for our overall improvement program in the 6 Mile Creek Halsted Bay subwatershed. The carp management program seeks to restore about 2,400 acres of deep and shallow lake through the management of common carp, through adult biomass removal, so getting the fish out of the system, controlling recruitment and reproduction through aeration of shallow lakes that are identified carp nurseries, and then installing barriers at strategic locations to both assist in the trapping process and then limit migration to key areas. And all of this work will be enhanced over time through subsequent work to restore adjacent upland and wetland areas. So in September of 2017, the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council recommended this program for funding, and that funding was subsequently awarded by the legislature. Per our approved work plan with Lessard-Sams, the grant funds are applied primarily to sort of the improvements in the physical infrastructure that support this carp management work. So the barrier construction and installation, the utility installation for the aeration, and then the contracts for the carp removal. The items that we are either purchasing or performing as match are the removal and monitoring equipment, the aeration units themselves, the design services for both the utility installation and the barriers, and then staff time in actively managing carp. The schedule for this program, it's a 3-year grant. So in 2018 through the winter of 2019, we were primarily focused on barrier design and installation at kind of the three most important areas for the barriers. So at the outlet of Lake Wasserman, on Crown College campus, and then at Highland Road adjacent to 6 Mile Marsh. We installed utilities at 2 of the sites, and then we began the adult biomass removal process. 2019 into the winter of 2020, we'll be installing the final barrier at between North and South Lunston, and then we're also evaluating the addition of a 5th barrier at Sunny Lake. We'll be completing the utility installation and then continuing the adult biomass removal. And then the final year of the grant is really heavily focused on reaching those targets for adult biomass removal. We're deploying several techniques to remove common carp. Commercial seining is kind of the most typical approach that you see other watershed districts doing. And we are pursuing both under ice and open water seining. But we're also doing some experimentation with stream chapping using both the permanent and some temporary barriers. And then one of the more innovative techniques that we're seeking this contract for tonight is the baited box net trapping, which is performed sort of exclusively by Carp Solutions right now.
How does that work?
The baited box net
Yeah.
trapping. So they essentially are laying a net at the bottom of the lake, and it's attached to a pulley system, and then they're baiting that area over several days, so the carp will really aggregate there, and then once they're seeing a high level of aggregation, they'll pull the pulley system up and just trap them in there.
Why are they wearing hard hats?
There are some very large carp out there. I have to assume that's why. I witnessed some carp removal today, and they are. I would be worried with them flapping around too.
How many pounds would they make?
So actually, Eric Fieldseth was out doing a little bit of stream trapping at Halstead Bay today, and I think he said he removed 40 carp, and the average size was 13.5 pounds. They were really something.
So we know what he's having for dinner tonight.
So a bit of an update on our removal progress. So in 2018, we did baited box net trapping in 2 lakes, Steiger and Auburn. In Steiger, so Steiger is much closer to the threshold already, and they were able to remove about 3,000 pounds through this baited box net trapping. One thing that they found through this process is that in these lakes that are very close to the threshold, baited box net trapping might not be the most effective. So, I mean, 3,000 pounds is good, but we're going to be looking at maybe doing some open water seining this summer to kind of pull that down to the threshold. But still, 3,000 pounds is substantial. At Auburn, they were quite successful with the baited box net trapping, which is a lake that is, much higher, much further above that biomass threshold. And they were able to remove over 10,000 pounds of carp. And then the other lake to sort of highlight in the removal progress is Wasserman. We had done winter seining in both 2017 and 2018 in Wasserman, which were quite successful, but you can see in the graph here that Wasserman is very well above the threshold. We sort of lucked out, I suppose, in when we deployed the temporary barrier leading up to now having that permanent barrier in place, in that the carp were not, they had moved out of Wasserman into Auburn when we deployed that temporary barrier. So it seems, based on sort of the preliminary data, that about 35,000 pounds worth of carp had moved into Auburn out of Wasserman. And now with that permanent barrier in place, they aren't able to move back into the lake. So we estimate that we are at the threshold, that our target threshold in Wasserman, and Eric will be verifying through some fish surveys this summer to kind of reassess the data and make sure that is in fact where we are.
How do they do this estimate? Is it based on the radio signals?
Manager Miller, I would have to follow up with Eric. I think it's partially based on the radio signals, but I'm not sure if they've also done some amount of surveys at this point, or if the surveys are to come.
I mean, it's pretty profound if it's scientifically based. I mean,
Yeah. Anecdotally, we've heard that it already looks a lot better, so it'll be great to verify the data and figure out exactly sort of where we are.
Mr. Beck may have information for us.
Yeah.
As the only board of managers, I can help answer that question.
I prefer anecdotes, but
And
science works.
last year we conducted 2 electrofishing surveys. So what you do is go out and collect fish through electrofishing survey, and there's a relationship between how many fish you collect in a few hours versus how many are in the lake. And so we did it a couple times and identified that they were either close or below that threshold.
Nice.
What is this technique?
Electrofishing. So what it is you go out and there's an electric current in the water, and it stuns the fish. You can go and net them, bring them in, count them, and then just put them back.
Okay.
It doesn't harm them permanently.
Okay.
There was a newspaper article a month or so ago that said the goal was eventually to harvest 880,000 pounds. Is that still a target?
I don't know off the top of my head exactly what the number is for the total biomass removal. If that was one of our articles, I'm sure that's the right number.
Okay.
Anecdotally, we're always interested when carp is the topic. Go ahead, Ms. Brown.
Thank you.
Did you have another question?
Yes.
Manager Meyer?
Do the carp have any natural predators that control them?
They don't. So the reason that that aeration is one of our key strategies is that there are other fish species that feed on the carp eggs. So that's a really good population control. You just prevent winter kill of other fish species, primarily bluegill and sunfish that will eat the carp eggs. But carp grow incredibly fast, and once they've reached a certain size, there aren't any natural predators.
No natural predators. Okay. Right. Which means that this is, once this is being done, there's going to have to be some maintenance on an ongoing basis.
Certainly, yes. So we are planning for a level of ongoing maintenance. The hope is that with having identified the areas where they reproduce and either aerating or using barriers at those locations, we can prevent kind of the ongoing recruitment. But I mean, one of the big sort of ongoing maintenance strategies is that we'll have to continue to monitor those nursery
Right, that's
areas
what I was thinking.
and identify when there is a successful
And when you
recruitment
need to
event.
do another intervention.
Exactly, yeah.
So
Because
yeah, go ahead.
adult carp are they are very, how do I say it? They reproduce at very large levels. So a single recruitment event can be really significant and have a really profound impact on these water bodies. So that's a really important thing to sort of monitor. And
Okay. And the aeration provides nutrition for those that predate the eggs?
so what the aeration does is it keeps a refuge where a refuge of oxygenated water in the winter. So it just keeps enough oxygen in the water that those predator fish can
That's
stay
what I thought.
alive.
Okay, that's what I
Yes.
thought it was. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
You're welcome. So again, the request this evening is to contract with Carp Solutions for carp removal services. The contract amount is a little over $107,000. This contract is fully reimbursable through the Lessard SAMS grant monies. And this contract would provide for baited boxnet trapping in 3 lakes. And we're thinking about these 4 lakes listed here as sort of the potential candidate lakes this year. All lakes with very high concentrations and that are well above the threshold. And allows for up to 5 removal attempts per lake. As with our contract last year, the amount of the contract that we use will depend on the number of attempts that we actually have, but this is sort of planning for the most number of attempts that we think we could accomplish this year. And again, we are also in conversations with a commercial fisherman who would do open water seining. So we might be back in front of you for an additional contract that would also provide for those removal services.
What verification do we have for these numbers that they're providing? Do we have on-site staff reviewing it?
For the number of attempts and all of that, yeah, our staff are very involved in these removal attempts. We're hands-on through the whole process. And then the other thing to just,
Question?
oh sure.
So when you do these removals, how do you assure that what they have done that they've accomplished, they obviously, what I read was that there was a professor and his crew that worked this. And so they've developed a way of saying, if we do this, we collect this much biomass. Is there some way to monitor to make sure that that's happening and that that's having the effect on the population?
Sure. So we know what our targets are for the total biomass removal for each water body, and we're out there measuring the fish, so we know what the actual biomass that are removed is. So we can kind of continually update, sort of based on our target biomass levels, but then as sort of a complementary process, the research and monitoring are doing those fish surveys, so they're verifying.
So there's a monitoring process going on. Okay.
Yes,
That's
yes.
what I needed to know. Okay, thank you.
Welcome. And then the other thing to just quickly note that's sort of complementary to all of this work is that we were before the board, I don't recall, within the last several months, presenting this opportunity where Dr. Przemysław Bayer, who's one of the lead carp researchers at the U, was looking to seek out some fundings from MACERC to essentially use some of the removal attempts that we're doing through this baited box net trapping to do some analysis to look at how that process for carp removal can be made more efficient. So he's been working through the peer review process with MACERC to secure this funding to support this work, and at this point it looks like he's likely to get that funding. So while we're doing this baited box net removal, his researchers will also be trying some techniques to enhance that efficiency and potentially improve our removal, as we move through this process. So that's moving along as well.
May I ask what MACERC is?
Yes, it's the Minnesota AIS Research Center. So they've been our partner for a lot of the carp removal or the carp studies that we've done, as well as, they're really a leading agency on a lot of other AIS research as well.
And that's the University of Minnesota.
Yes, University of Minnesota.
Falcon Heights.
So with that, again, I'm seeking
Move
approval of that
approval.
contract. Thank you.
Is there a second to adopt Resolution 19049?
Second.
Manager Rognus, any further questions or comments? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Ms. Brown.
Thank you.
Resolution 1950, contract with a consultant for Long Lake Carp Assessment. Mr. Beck.
President White, Board of Managers, what I have for you today is a request to authorize execution of contract with WSB for the Long Lake Creek subwatershed assessment. So, quick overview. What we'll be going over today is just an overview of Long Lake Creek subwatershed, the resource issues and drivers of poor water quality in that watershed, some of the partnership background, in addition to project overview, and the Bowser Clean Water grant that we obtained in 2018. And lastly, the request for authorization to execute contract. So just giving a brief overview of the watershed district. If you remember, there's the three focal geographies. And just to note, here is Long Lake Creek subwatershed, and it is not in one of the focal geographies. So this is considered one of the responsive projects. If we zoom in to Long Lake Creek subwatershed, the primary issues in this watershed are excess nutrients, localized flooding, and degraded habitat, in addition to degraded and disconnected corridors. And the things that are driving these problems are altered wetlands, common carp, stormwater runoff, and internal phosphorus loading. So generally we understand what the issues are, and generally we understand what the drivers are as well. And with that understanding of what's going on in the watershed, partnerships were formed because of those issues. So in 2016, the city of Long Lake, Medina, and Orono entered a partnership to identify ways to improve water quality and attempt to remove some of these impairments for water quality. During that time, there was a formation of the Long Lake Creek Waters Association, which is a citizen group, and that's watershed-wide to really understand how citizens can engage and improve water quality, not just for one lake, but for a whole watershed. In 2007, the partnership worked with Minnehaha Creek to apply for a grant to assess the carp in Long Lake Creek. However, that was unsuccessful. In 2018, a partnership formed between all of these entities, including Minnehaha Creek Watershed. And what we are doing in this role is acting as the technical lead and convener of the group. And the reason why we thought that was a really good role for us is from the standpoint of our implementation model. And if you remember from the presentation at the PPC, we really want to understand what's going on with our resources, understand our partners' plans, take that, integrate it, and put it into an implementation plan so different agencies can implement those different projects. And the reason why us as the technical lead makes sense is we want to make sure we understand our watershed in a holistic way. We don't want to just focus on carp because watershed runoff or internal loading or some other issue might also be a problem that needs to be addressed in addition to carp. So kind of going back to a parallel process that's been going on during that partnership formation is monitoring efforts have been going on between both Minnehaha Creek Watershed District staff and led by some of the partner organizations as well. So in 2018, there was a scaled down carp assessment in just Long Lake, which identified an excess abundance of carp in Long Lake. So those carp are likely causing ecological damage. However, no surveys were done in any of the other lakes, so it's hard to tell, okay, are some of the other lakes have issues from carp, or is it just Long Lake? In addition, we've been conducting an intensive water quality monitoring effort in 2017, 2018, and this year. And what we were able to do is leverage that to obtain a Bowser Clean Water Fund grant to develop a holistic understanding of the watershed, not just one lake here, not just water quality that we're measuring, but putting all that information together and identifying projects that our partners can implement. So in the ground projects. So that Clean Water Fund grant is essentially two different parts. So there's a watershed and in-lake strategy portion to it, and there's also a carp management strategy. And taking those two pieces of information, you can identify what are the issues, what are the drivers, so those are the things that we really understand at this point. And then take that information and develop an implementation strategy that we can put into one document and hand to the partners so they can implement those projects in the future. So we released two RFPs earlier in April, one for the watershed and in-lake nutrient study and one for the carp assessment. And just to mention the reason why we have just the carp assessment presentation today is that it's a relatively time-sensitive project because we know that carp are migrating and we're trying to tag them and track them, so we want to get going as soon as we can. Whereas the nutrient sub-watershed assessment is a little bit less time-sensitive. We'll be bringing that to the next board meeting for. So just to familiarize you again with the carp assessment, it includes three things which relate to the last presentation. So we want to understand three things. We want to track the carp to see where they're going, where they reproduce, identify what the biomass is in each lake to figure out is one lake better or worse than the other and where we need to focus in the future. In addition, identify the recruitment and reproduction areas to see if aeration is a feasible option. So making sure we keep those bluegill alive so that they can eat the carp eggs and keep that population down. Carp Solutions has already been contracted to build remote carp tracking equipment, so tracking where those carp go. However, we still need to catch the carp and implant them with tags so that the equipment can track the tags. And the interesting part about that is we're using a fairly unique system for this in that it doesn't require any staff to be out and tracking. it just remotely tracks them. So we put those out and it just tracks them as they pass through the system. So it's a really unique and interesting system that we're using. And what I have today is the carbon, the second and third bullet points, which is the biomass estimates in addition to the recruitment and reproduction assessment. So that's the second part of this CARP study, which we put out for RFP. The RFP had a couple different portions to it. There were required tasks, which had a really finite scope to them. And there was also some optional tasks, which the approach was not clear. So that was something where we wanted to see what we got back, whereas there was a few tasks that were pretty straightforward. And we based our assessment on general understanding of the project budget, and that project budget really was on those required tasks. And the optional task approach, how would they approach these tasks that are a little bit more difficult and are unclear, how we would accomplish them. And based on that, we are recommending WSB based on their approach and cost. So with that, we're requesting to execute contract with WSB for an amount not to exceed $34,823 to conduct the sub-watershed assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 19050?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Olson, any further questions? Manager Olson?
Are we the only entity doing the billing and the contracting? In other words, the Bowser grant is reimbursing us?
Yes.
Okay. So nobody else is?
Yeah, Manager
A
Olson,
subset of that.
yeah,
Okay.
it's going directly to us and we're going directly to the
Right.
consultants.
Thank you.
Question.
Mr. Damati?
I noticed that you had a set of tracking methods that you were sure you could get results and some that you were not, had some questions about. In your estimate, based on your expertise looking at that, do you think that those are effective, the ones that the second category, the one that you're not so sure of getting results? And I realize that it's necessary to do research to figure out what's going on. Do you have confidence in what they're doing?
Yeah, Manager Hedgemati, the primary issues with some of the tasks were access to lakes. We weren't confident that, we weren't sure if we could get equipment in there. And we were seeing if there was a unique way to get a boat into a lake that has no access, that has steep slopes. And what equipment could we get in there and things like that. So it's not necessarily the scientific methods that we're worried about.
So
it's really constraints of
okay.
land use and things.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Anything else? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? See you on May 9th. Thank you. Item 12.3, Resolution 19051. Ms. Schaufler. Mr. Whisker.
Before Tiffany starts her presentation, she handed me some of the Nokomis area groundwater fact sheets. Would anybody want one as sort of a guide for the discussion? Okay, I'll hand those down.
Thank you, President White and managers. Tonight, staff is before you to seek authorization to contract with White to assist the district in drafting a white paper synthesis on the evaluation that the district's been participating on for over the past year and a half to evaluate the surface water and groundwater interactions in South Minneapolis. So tonight I'm going to briefly walk through just a quick history of what we've done over the past year and a half, talk about next steps of where that evaluation is going, and then end with the white paper that we're proposing tonight. So since 2017, the district's been participating in an evaluation of some high groundwater concerns in South Minneapolis. And the concerned area is circled here in red, so it's to the south and west side of Lake Nokomis. And the main concerns here are that groundwater is interacting with public and private infrastructure. So citizens have been having to repair their private sewer laterals and also have been noticing some water intruding on their into their basements. So to kick off this evaluation, in November of 2017, there was a technical summit. There was the district attended that, the park board, the city, the Metropolitan Airport Council, MnDOT, City of Richfield, so kind of the whole gamut of agencies in that area came together just to figure out what information is known, what do people know about water levels, and then a good set of citizens that also attended that meeting. And that was really the kickoff to figure out what do we do, where do we go, and also was the initiation of a project website that the city of Minneapolis offered to host. So from that meeting, there was some conversation, and then formally in January of 2018, we had the first technical team meeting of this interagency group. And the interagency group, the logos are shown there, and that's really been the DNR, the City of Minneapolis, the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board, Hennepin County, and the Watershed have been leading this interagency panel to evaluate what is going on in this area. And that interagency group has also been coordinating with some other agency staff from the USGS, MnDOT, MAC, and the City of Richfield as necessary. And over the past year and a half, we've met over 20 times, either in a technical team form or in a leadership capacity, and have identified and reviewed over 70 pieces of data and past reports. And through that review, have identified a couple data gaps. The main one was there isn't enough groundwater well information in the area. So since November of 2017, the interagency group has installed 6 additional wells and have spent over $140,000 installing those wells. And those wells have really been a key to help fill some of those data gaps and reach some conclusions. So kind of where we're at present day is we've drawn some working conclusions, and we feel pretty confident in those. Most recently, as the district is aware, we shared those working conclusions with Senator Torres Ray, and she found that information extremely helpful and felt that the interagency group had a very sound foundation in the science that's known. And from that, the interagency group felt probably be good as a logical next step to conclude and synthesize the information that we've reviewed to date. So taking those working conclusions, I've bulleted out kind of what those are below. So just very quickly, it's what's happening is, as we are well aware, it's rained more than ever has. So in this last 6-year period is the wettest 6 years ever on record. And that record of precipitation is occurring outside the growing season. So when vegetation isn't growing and plants aren't able to uptake the water. So that's causing record recharge across the whole Twin Cities metro. And then you couple that with shallow bedrock in this area, you have record recharge rates interacting with very shallow bedrock, and the water is wanting to percolate up. And then looking at the groundwater wells that we put in, we're able to look at a groundwater gradient, and there's a map. That map inside your fold-out helps identify that. So essentially what you're seeing on that gradient is the groundwater elevations in those wells is actually higher than the lake level and higher than Lake Nokomis. So when you look at all of that, and you realize that Minnehaha Creek, for 97% of the time over the past 3 years, has been below the outlet of Lake Nokomis, the creek can't be the impediment that's causing the groundwater concerns. And then if you zoom out even more and look at the elevations of the homes that are being impacted, they're actually sitting about 18 feet above the Lake Nokomis water level. So this demonstrates that this is likely a perched water table that's affecting those residents, which is separate from the Lake Nokomis groundwater system. And because those are a separate issue, it's most likely a very local issue, meaning potentially when the area was developed, wetlands are filled, or different soil was mixed, and it's literally just the soil that's under the foundation of those homes that's causing the problems. So due to this, this working group has concluded, to this point, because it's a very local issue, don't feel that a big study is needed, and are going to work to then synthesize the work done to date.
How many homes are involved?
To our Manager Miller, to our knowledge, we've been identified, the City of Minneapolis has been alerted to around 20. I've been told by local residents more than that, but that's the map that we have had from the city of Minneapolis. So, those working conclusions are going kind of two different ways and through two different filters. So, as the board may recall, in February of this year, the board approved a contract with the University of Minnesota to do a third-party independent review. So, based on our past collaboration with the University of Minnesota and their intimate knowledge of Minnehaha Creek and the flows in the base flow study, we reached out to them, and they're interested in helping not only review the white paper itself, but also trying to define some questions to help us answer, to see if there are any data gaps that maybe the interagency group hadn't thought about. So some questions we had thrown out to them are, when Minnehaha Creek is bank full, what's the impact of that water? How far is it reaching? Is it just the immediate riparian zone? What are the impacts of infiltration BMPs, just in general? Is that, again, that footprint of that water being infiltrated very local, or what's the expansion of that? So those are just some examples. And then additionally, when they're defining those questions, if there's any data gaps that they're identified that they need to help answer those questions, identifying those, and then recommending kind of a scope, schedule, and budget to gather that data. So that's an independent third-party review that's happening, and then in concurrence with that, we're proposing to then synthesize this white paper. And this would synthesize, like, as I stated, over 1.5 years of studies that the interagency group has looked at, which is around 70 studies of past studies and current new data that was developed over 20 meetings and staff time to date. And what we're proposing to do with this is prepare kind of two executive summaries. One would be more of a visually appearing summary similar to our comp plan, so one that you could easily hand out to policymakers, constituents, easily digestible synthesis of what is happening, and then more of your more typical white paper, which would adhere and be helpful to technical staff. So 5 years from now, if someone has a question on what would happen and evaluated, there's a technical understanding of what was evaluated and looked at. So tonight before you, staff has a scope of work in the packet for WENC, and the main buckets of work is to prepare a preliminary draft. And through that preliminary draft, there's going to be a lot of coordination, because we've had 1.5 years of working with this interagency group. Each agency kind of has their niche and expertise, so a lot of coordinating to make sure all of that's being prepared and articulated in the correct way. And then a parallel track coordinating with the U of M to make sure that's happening cohesively and efficiently for their review and their synthesis. So that'll be kind of the big chunk of the work, and then taking that and preparing a final draft. So with that, staff is recommending authorization to contract with WENC for the amount to draft the white paper, an amount not to exceed $31,500, and authorizes a 20% contingency. And we're asking for 20% this time just because there is a lot of moving pieces and a lot of meetings and interagency coordination, so just want to allot a little bit extra in case that is needed. And one last thing I want to note is for the white paper itself, we're also proposing to have that be a similar layout to the comp plan. So you're having your kind of columns, and a lot of infographics are going to be created, because it is a very complicated issue, and trying to put it in as plain language and visually understand what people would think will go a long way. So with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 19051?
So moved.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Hishmati, you have a question, Hishmati?
Yeah. Let's say there's, and I don't mean to diminish all the science that's involved here, but I think we're between a lack of total understanding by some people, local politics, and other issues that are getting involved here. But just focusing on those houses that are impacted by the high water. irrespective of the source, what would it cost to target harden each one of those homes?
Manager
You
Miller?
know, put sumps in or, you know, foundation draining and those kinds of things that most of us are used to doing. What would it cost to do that?
Manager Miller, I don't know off the top of my head, I don't know.
Just roughly.
Mr. Meehan?
Manager Miller, my guess, if I had to guess, it's probably 5,000 to 10,000 a house to put in a sump and put
Okay.
those together. Then the 20 that we do know, then you're probably $200,000 to $300,000 is my guess.
You know, I don't want to pretend that I got a solution, but, you know, the Airports Commission solved the noise problem by air conditioning, insulating, and putting new windows in all the houses that were affected. Why wouldn't somebody, rather than do all these studies and have all these meetings, if they know who's affected, come up with a program to fund the solution for each household?
Mr. Whisker?
Manager Miller, managers, I think that's a key policy question, but to date, the members of the policymaker community across the different agencies or at the legislature, interested residents, affected residents, and folks that are involved in, you know, downstream issues around Hiawatha Golf Course haven't trusted the science and haven't come to grips with what's actually driving the problem. So it's hard to make a targeted policy decision about where to spend money to solve an issue if you don't believe what's causing it. So I think in terms of why we've had the meetings and why we spent all this time and why Hennepin County's put money literally into the ground to drill wells is to provide a level of conclusive evidence as to why these group of homes are experiencing wet basement issues. And from there, there's going to be a governance question in terms of public-private expenditure, who's responsible for, you know, implementing some of the solutions. So I think through the white paper, one of the things that we've been discussing internally at a staff level is how far does this interagency panel want to go under this umbrella of contracting with WANC to outline the specific solutions and what some of those costs are. But to answer your question, the reason nobody's done that is people haven't believed that this is a very localized issue associated with a perched groundwater table. They felt that it was driven by the creek and that it could be solved by upstream management issues. So that's why we've been on this year-long quest to provide a level of conclusive evidence as to what's actually causing the problem.
Thank you.
Well, it doesn't, you know, it tells you what problem you're dealing with, but it doesn't. Will the WINC study propose a solution for these homes? I don't think so. You know, we'll have a lot more information certifying what we already know, and we'll have several groups of public and private experts saying the same thing, and though people will still have water in their basements. Go ahead.
Mr. Manager Olson and then Mr. Whisker?
Have there been documented cases where perched water tables have been mitigated? Is there a technique to?
Manager Olson's not necessarily effectively, because they are perched and essentially you're trying to take up a big pan that's underneath your groundwater.
Are these 20 houses close to each other?
Manager Olson, where we know they're kind of within a several block area,
Okay.
so they're fairly close to one another, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Whisker?
I've reconsidered my my decision to speak.
Okay.
I have a question. Based on the, based on the fact that it's high bedrock and the kind of soil and so on, are there feasible, is it sufficient to to have just some pumps installed, because if the stuff doesn't filter out, then all you're doing is recycling the water. So I mean, if I'm approaching it from a technical point of view, do you have confidence that there will be enough data to come up with effective solutions that account for the specific qualities of that area?
Manager Hijmati, that's a good question, and something that on the periphery we're tracking in our coordination with the University of Minnesota, them realizing this is a bigger issue beyond just South Minneapolis. So when I say that,
Yes.
there are people, other places across the metro having similar situations to this.
Exactly. That's
So,
what I'm wondering.
they had partnered up with the USGS and the Minnesota Geological Survey, and they've submitted an LCCMR proposal to take a bigger look metro-wide at where you have, are there commonalities among these places? Is it a type of houses built in a certain era, built on a certain topography, bedrock? And if those are commonalities, then you can help focus resources to maybe help people mitigate against that, or have some sort of, to Manager Miller's point, some sort of funding to help those folks. So that's something that is related, but not directly a focus of this white paper.
Okay. So what you're saying is that there are some other resources being allocated to get the big picture of the interaction between infiltration and soil and so on.
Yeah, and certainly, some of the university's work of the third-party review for us will maybe get to some of that as well, but certainly there's more broader regional agencies that are trying to figure out how can they kind of get their grasp around this and really understand the seasonal variation of the water table. Because when you talk about, the water table and groundwater, it's much bigger than people can necessarily comprehend.
Yes.
So what the true impact of that is on the Twin Cities Metro.
Right. So is there, I see that this is a finite scope of work, it's going to be finished at a certain point of time, that's very appropriate. The other part of it, do you have any ideas based on your information, what kind of timeline they're talking about to put that kind of information, the big picture together? Do you have any sense of how that's going to come about?
Manager Hamaji, well, that's right now, because they're requesting, state legislature funds. That's kind of on that timeline. There's been some talk of our policymakers that maybe that's something that would, rise to a more immediate need, but that's certainly out of our purview or grasp.
So it's part of the legislature. It has to go through the legislature. Okay, I get it. Thank you.
Any other questions from Ms. Schaufler? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And,
I'm gonna vote-
excuse me. Oh, you're voting?
No,
Okay.
not that I'm against science, but, I just think this putting more money, proving what we already know, giving it to people that don't believe it. And, I just think we should use the money in a better way.
Okay. For Manager Hijmati's benefit, Chris Meehan is district engineer. He's been providing information here in this discussion. Thank you, Ms. Schaufler. We'll move to item 12.4, Resolution 19052. Ms. Reynolds.
Evening, President White, managers. Tonight I am back with the request to approve the contract with the IT consultant. Kind of go back through this, kind of give an overview of where we've been over the course of about a year now that I've been working on this project. Kind of give you an update on the budget and what we're looking at, the consultant, the objectives kind of through this contract that we've worked out, and then kind of an overview of the contract. So kind of going back and looking at this again, started with the 2017 Strategic Alignment Plan, where we noted that we needed to develop a strategic plan for investment in information technology.
we have kind of coined this now as kind of being a comprehensive IT update for the district and kind of looking at that. Kind of going back over, really kind of, the overview of this started last in May of 2018 with kind of an initial meeting with the OPC, laying out some of the initial planning that we were looking at doing, some very rough initial goals that we've developed over the course of the last year through the business analysis that we went through, the development of the RFP or RFQ through this month where we did interviews with the 3 vendors, and we sought board approval on the selected vendor at the April 11th meeting. And tonight we are back with the contract to seek board approval of the contract.
I'll interrupt and say that it's not in our packet.
We don't have it in our package.
We have no resolution, no
We have a
RPA.
placeholder.
Oh, it was updated again on it was updated on Tuesday.
No, not there now.
Okay. Sorry, I put it on the website on Tuesday. So, you wish to, I can,
I move the table.
yeah.
Second.
We'll come back to this in subsequent meetings.
We'll come back to it. I'm sorry, I thought it got uploaded to the website on Tuesday.
To vote on.
Right.
Well, we'll see you on May 9th then.
We'll see you on May 9th. Sure what happened to it.
Item 12.5, Resolution 19-053, renewal of employee benefits. Mr. Whisker.
Is that one in the packet?
Yes.
I'm looking.
I just figured I'd save myself some time maybe if it was
No, no, you're good.
There it is.
permission to proceed then. So I think the board's been tracking this fairly closely, so there isn't a really detailed, I have to turn my microphone on, a detailed presentation tonight, but by way of background, as part of our strategic human resource planning and the total compensation discussions, we've spent what I think is a considerable amount of time since January of 2019 analyzing and discussing the potential benefit renewal for plan year 2019-2020, so that's May 31st of 2019 through next year, 2020, for employee benefits. And we've reviewed along the way, the board's been interested as a picture of total compensation, salary and benefits, in looking at the total costs of benefits, the market comps, so how we compare to market costs. We've looked at a variety of different scenarios on how we combine benefit offerings for employees, and then we've looked at, through those scenarios, how the costs might shift over time. In the board's discussion today, it's really revolved around being mindful of growing healthcare costs and wanting to make fiscally responsible decisions, but then still providing competitive benefits, competitive salary, and a total compensation perspective to make sure that we're meeting our goals for recruitment and retention of top talent. And through all that discussion that culminated in April at the Operations and Programs Committee, there's some general consensus about this year's renewal, and that's summarized, all that detail summarized in the resolution 19053. So the packet lays out the background, the chronology of discussion in detail, and sort of cutting to the chase, it authorizes a couple things. It authorizes the administrator to renew benefits within the board-approved budget that was amended in January for the salary component, along with the elimination of the district-funded health reimbursement account this year, which we discussed at the Operations Committee as being a proactive step we can take this year to provide cost control and help us step into benefit renewal for next year, but also cost control through the budgeting process for 2020. It also establishes sort of a general guiding practice or policy regarding how the board's going to be involved in benefit renewal on an ongoing basis. And so that just outlines that the board would guide benefit renewal by careful discussion and analysis of what it wants to do in terms of setting a budget for benefits through the annual budgeting process. And then that from there, when we get to benefit renewal, that the combination of offerings would be delegated to the administrator to figure out, provided it's within that board-approved budget. And that over time, both on an annual basis and then periodically, whether it's every 5 or 6 years based on our compensation policies, we go back to market we would be retesting and rebenchmarking where we are. So we'd be doing that using sort of a basic index on an annual basis, and then every 5 years looking at the market. So with that, I can take questions.
Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 19053?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus, are there questions for Mr. Whisker? All those in favor say aye.
Sorry. Can I ask a
Go ahead,
question?
Manager Loftus.
If we hadn't amended the budget to do larger salary increases in January, would this be in the budget?
Manager Loftus, you and I have talked about this, and I know.
I asked a question, but I didn't.
Sure.
I never heard back on how it
Yep.
flushed out, but
Yeah, so the way that we looked at the budget this year, and I've got this in front of me here, we did break down wages, overtime, payroll tax, unemployment, PIRA, and then to that we applied an estimated 10% for adjusting for class and comp through the 2019 budgeting process last September. This January, the board amended that number, which was that 10% was around $181,000 for salary, up $32,000 to $213,000. So there's an amendment to the salary line item, and then the benefits under a separate line item. The budget for that was $349,000. This year, the total benefit renewal is coming at $340,000. You're eliminating the health reimbursement account to take that down further. So if you to look at it in aggregate and you hadn't amended for the salary, the benefits would still be in the total budget, and within a line item basis, it's within that budget, if that answers your question.
I think it does. I think it's a lesson for me in kind of the budget process. I thought we had specifically said, let's take the increase of both the salary and healthcare, set it to the side for next year, knowing how much was going to change, and set it as a set dollar amount. And now it's separate line items and whatnot. So I guess that's something for me to be more mindful of going forward.
Right, and I know you and I had talked about that, and apologize for not closing the loop before this evening. I went back and looked at, the 10 documents that we hand out for the budget, and we did break it out into specific line items for, like I said, wages, overtime. There's that level of breakdown. The board wasn't explicit or specific in terms of we're capping the total bottom line or these individual bottom lines. So I do think, like we talked about, it's this year it'll be incumbent on us as the board chooses to set a benefit budget moving forward, that we're just really clear and open, and we're all on the same page. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? Those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Now we are ready for the administrator's report. Mr. Whisker again.
Yeah, President White, managers, I've got an update here from Telly that I think we're setting a record here for a number of years running that we've won the Minnesota Association of Government Communicators Award. We're getting another one this year in 2019 for the Creek Map, but also our 2019 Look Forward, which is our annual publication this year. And instead of being a retrospective, it was sort of forward-focused on outputs, and that's made up of federal, state, regional, county, local government communications personnel. And another note on that is that Telly's been elected president of that group, so she's got a 2-year.
Yeah, I wonder how she got the award.
Right. I know, when she'd updated the administrator's report, I was like, should I split those out or combine them? But she is president, and we've won an award. In terms of interviews, we've been doing a lot of interviews lately. Mike and his team have been doing interviews for the planner project manager positions. We've narrowed that down to a pool of finalists. They're going to be getting called back in the next week or two, and hopefully we'll have a decision and have somebody on board here yet in May. And then we've been working through with various board liaisons and staff groups the interviews, obviously, for the IT stuff, which has already been selected, but then more recently the website interviews and strategic communications interviews. And as you know, I think at IT, the website, and communications are all sort of working in tandem, both in terms of process and the outputs that they're going to deliver for the organization. So in the next week or two, staff's going to be coordinating on how all those converge in terms of web vendor, strategic communications consultants, And ideally, that would be coming back in front of the board May 9th, but there's some logistics there to work out. I've been presenting, and I've given the board an update on this. Previously, I'd presented, and now it's past tense, presented this last week at the Sensible Land Use Coalition. They do sort of quarterly, monthly programming, and it's made up of the private developer community, as well as community development directors, city managers, that sort of thing. And part of a regulatory panel, we were invited in to sit in with state agencies and some others. And my presentation really focused on how changing precipitation patterns are going to start impacting the land use planning community, but moreover focused on the value of the district's early intervention into the land use planning process, and how we really want to become a preferred partner for public and private land use planners. So it was good exposure for us on that front. And I'll be following that up next Friday with the Minneapolis Real Estate Journal on a similar panel that I'll be presenting at with the Bassett Creek Executive Director Laura Jester, and again we'll be focusing on our public-private partnership model. And I think the last piece I have for you is myself, Tiffany, and Becky attended the National Planning Conference, the American Planning Association Conference in San Francisco this year. A couple highlights: we've learned a lot about resilience planning. That was a central theme. So a lot of lessons learned from around the nation in terms of big regional modeling studies and how we're taking forecast science and using that to drive community development strategy and local resilience strategy at a municipal level, which I think is going to be coming in handy as we look out on the 5 to 10 year horizon for the kind of work that we might be involved in. There's also some interesting sessions on how the role of planners has evolved over time. There was some sessions lamenting over how the planning community have turned into code enforcers and fee collectors, and sort of long gone are the days of community development planners creating extremely bold, forward-looking visions for a community. So there's a sort of central thread there of calling for that to become more central to the discipline versus being farmed out to the consultant community. And then there was another interesting session on how to take community development strategy from vision to action, which I think is really relevant for our work, because community development isn't something like when we talked through the CIP discussion earlier, where a municipality holds all the chips and has all of the control. They've got to engage the private sector, and there's a lot of voluntary participation. And so there a matrix that had been developed by a group that had repeatedly experienced failure of vision to execution. And they'd sort of broken things down in terms of the necessary components to be successful on these big plans. And they'd broken it down into people, resources, action. And in the people category, they talked about needing to take steps to create a united political agenda around a big idea. So making sure all your partners are pointed the right direction and that there's buy-in. They talked about, within a municipal setting, getting buy-in institutionally outside of the planning group. So making sure that the other departments and silos, that there's touch points there, and making sure that there's always in each one of those agencies one key political advocate or a liaison to the big vision. Resources, they talked about longevity of resources, budget and funding, and just making sure that there's clear priorities and a programmatic basis for obviously the money. And then in terms of action, there's a lot of focus on catalyzing efforts, so that first big project that creates the win, making sure that the work that's being done is both actionable and measurable, and that plans are adaptable, because nothing ever goes according to plan. So I think there were some good lessons learned at the conference, and that's something that we're pulling back and handing off to Mike as we start thinking about what are the key parameters that we need to make sure we're hitting in order to be successful in geographies like 6 Mile or the city of Minneapolis. So that's what I have for you, and take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
I'm really grateful that you went to a conference where cutting edge thinking is being presented and you're bringing it back. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome.
And Rosen.
That cutting edge experience, how would resilience planning, what would be the biggest effect on what we do, on our approach and how we?
Well, I don't know that there would be a huge shift in our approach or what we do, but I think there will be a question that we want to call in the next 3 to 5 years. If you look out to the next comprehensive plan cycle in 2027, what information are our communities going to need from us in order to make sure their community development strategies and infrastructure is resilient to changing climate? We've had the wettest 6 years on record. 2014, we had the wettest 6 months on record. We had the single wettest June on record. 2016 was the wettest year on record. We've had the record number of 1-inch rainstorms in consecutive months. I think 2018, we had the snowiest April on record. 19, we had the snowiest February on record. So as these precipitation patterns change, we're going to have more and more conflict between ground and surface water and public-private infrastructure, our built systems. So what information do we think we need to provide communities in order for them to think about how to adapt to that change? Because this isn't what should we do when this happens? It's already happening. When you look at national maps, Minnesota for spring, summer, fall, we're seeing already a 15% deviation from normal rainfall patterns over the last 6 years. In 6 years, we've received a 30-inch deviation from the amount of rain that we'd normally get, which means we've gotten 7 years worth of rain in the last 6 years. So I think it's not so much about what's our approach, it's going to be what information do we need to provide our community so they can adapt to that. And more than likely, it's looking at how things are going to continue changing, forecast data through our big regional systems model, and being clear about what are the regional impacts and then what are the local impacts. How's it going to stress the grid, subsurface infrastructure, homes, so that communities in the district can work together and sort of divide and conquer on what's our regional flood or climate change adaptation strategies, and then what's the role of the community.
Thank you.
Andrew Miller.
I really feel comfortable with that description, that we're not flailing in the wind, trying to come up with a justification for what we're doing. I mean, we're not cutting edge, but we're certainly up to speed on climate change, and the effort on communication with the creek and the water coming out of the lake, that kind of thing is, I don't know anybody that's doing any better job of it. And these recreating or restoring wetlands and all these kinds of things, I think maybe gives justification for some acceleration of our programs rather than being out 10 years addressing it a lot sooner. That's why I'm really excited about the new planners that you're bringing on board, because it's going to increase our capacity to anticipate these opportunities and problems that we're going to be facing and address them. So I feel really comfortable. Not with what's happening, but our ability to respond to it.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Manager Hedgemati, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I had a question. Maybe because I'm new at this. Obviously you're going to collect this information that's needed for resilience planning, and then you're going to disseminate it. And I was listening to the presentation during the meeting about talking to some of the cities like Hopkins and so on, where you say something and nothing happens. And so I'm wondering, how effective is it going to be or how do you make it effective? How do you disseminate the information in a way that's effective, that the communities can absorb it and use it? Help me out, please.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question for your first meeting. I don't know if I've got a perfect answer for you, but I think that it's not, the answer is, it's not about us collecting the information and disseminating it out. It's got to be a collaborative process that engages political leadership and community development planners and parks planners. And so when you look at, if you were to do this work, if the and these are some of the discussions we'll be getting into when we think about where do we want to be in 5 years. If you reverse schedule from the 2027 comprehensive plans that cities are going to be going through, when do they need the information? Well, they'll need it a couple of years in advance. And then you reverse schedule from there, you've got 4 years to, bring them along. It's not about doing a study and then sending them a letter.
Exactly.
So there's going to be a need to design and intentionally design a process that over a period of years, not 1 year or 2 meetings, brings community leadership to the table and state agencies to the table and mobilizes resources where you can use their local information, our regional information, stitch that together, do forecast modeling, do long-range scenario planning, and educate people as to what their communities are going to be facing in 10 to 15 years. And so they've got to be at the table. And then at the end of that, ideally, you've run a clean enough process where people are adopting the findings with an idea that they're integrating that information into their local plans.
So are you folks thinking about a process for that?
I kind of just did. We haven't really started that process yet. So I think, when we engage
you define the elements, but I
Right.
mean, how do you go about doing it? Are you?
Yeah, we've been talking and thinking about that internally. I think the Board of Managers through their annual retreats are going to have to decide strategically, where do we want to be in 5 years as an organization? Where do you want to align your resources? And is that something that you want to get into? Is it a niche or an area that we can provide a value add to communities? What are some of the obstacles? What does the process look like? So we've, like you said, gone to national, local, regional APA and other climate adaptation conferences and been plugging in, and we're bringing that information back, and we're starting to think about what are the policy implications for this organization, and is that a space that we want to occupy?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, that answers my question. Okay.
Good to go? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
As
I'm
an-
sorry. This is part of the administrator's report?
Part of the
I'm adjourned.
administrative part, yeah.
Okay, my bad. Hopefully I didn't
We're back
steal
in
your
session.
thunder.
So, good segue. I just wanted to give the board another briefing because we keep teetering on almost flooding. So just a quick situation report, and this is all on our website, but just want to articulate it in person, is, we're not unique that flooding's happening in our watershed. It's happening across the entire state right now. And because of that, there are some things in process that are allowing Hennepin County and Carver County to start assessing, especially for individual homeowners if they're having problems, let them know. They're trying to determine if they're reaching enough threshold to seek assistance in some declarations. So that's something we're pushing out. If we're getting calls, people just to make sure that they feel like they have some sort of control over the situation. But where we're at is the next 6 to 10 days to 8 to 14 days are wet. They're predicting above average precipitation, so we're just going to kind of stay here for a bit. So here's where we're currently at for the lake level, and I'll explain this to Manager Hamaji probably more when he comes in for briefings, but you see that red line is teetering right on the edge of that blue and white zone, which means we're almost at the spillway. So here's a picture of the spillway, the emergency spillway this morning. So the red line is where the top of that sheet pile weir is. So we're about 9-10 inches of head difference between the lake and the creek, and the lake is just hovering right at it. It keeps kind of fluctuating within hundredths at this point. So the forecast for the next 7 days is showing, I'll jump ahead to here. So this is the detailed forecast we get from the Weather Service. So Saturday, they're talking around a ½ inch. So just as we kind of start to gain back some storage, we get rain. So we're just not making any headway, unfortunately. And this is the rain we got on Monday. So this is breaking down all those Hennepin County Mesonet stations we have across the district and how they're impacting water levels. And then these are our real-time USGS gauge, so you can see the one on the left is Lake Minnetonka. Some of that's just wind action, but it's just kind of, as you see, dancing along that red line of the spillway. And the creek is pretty much holding steady at 300. So what we've been communicating out is we're going to be here for a bit. We're at 9:30. It takes, even under normal weather, it would take at least a month to draw the lake down to the OHW of 929.4. So I've been in touch with all of our creek communities this week to articulate that and to also ask them what information can we provide that'd be useful. So what we've done, and we're proposing to work with WENC early next week, is to run a bunch of different scenarios of different storm events that could happen. So then the cities can know ahead of time what elevation that rainstorm will bring the creek to, what flow will it bring to, and they know where the hot spots are for their communities, and also coordinating with Methodist Hospital as well. So we're anticipating them providing that information next week. They all thought that would be extremely helpful to help articulate areas or houses that might have problems, and then can be well suited to be able to react to that. So that's kind of the newest thing we're pushing out, and just trying to start messaging that we're going to be here for a bit, just like we were in 2014. We can't just bring the lake down overnight, especially when the upper streams are pouring in. That's just as much as we're trying to get out. So one other note is ice out was officially declared on Saturday. So we got the dam, remember, open and running a month ahead of that. So we'd be in pretty rough shape if we hadn't done that. And the other main thing is just if you do hear residents having problems, to have them reach out to their community emergency management staff, and that information is all on our website. So the other thing is we'll keep pushing out email updates and website updates. Kind of our internal threshold for pushing out those high water updates is if it's like an inch or more of rain predicted. That's been kind of our threshold for pushing those out. Otherwise, we update the website kind of every other day. Any questions? Otherwise,
I was at the dam this morning, and a visitor there was saying how closely she and her family watch the website, and they really appreciate the explanation. So there's part of our public saying they like it.
good.
The amount of information.
Perfect.
We are adjourned.
All right.
For real.